good to be alive in this land of ours. Good to drive in this land of ours.
Hello, Canada hockey fans in the United States.
If it's 7 o'clock Eastern time on a Thursday night, it's Hockey Time Machine. Hello again, everybody. I'm Steve Paikin in Midtown Toronto, and on behalf of Paul and Laura and Glenn, we're happy to welcome you to tonight's program. 20 years ago, two Canadian hockey teams showed up at the Olympics in Salt Lake City with a mission to end many, many decades of futility, and they both did. Team Canada's men's and women's hockey both struck gold, and we'll focus on that tonight. We'll talk to three members of the women's gold medal team later. Up first now, Tim Wharnsby. He is the author of Gold: How Gretzky's Men Ended Canada's 50-year Olympic Hockey Drought, and he joins us from the Corktown neighborhood of Toronto, Ontario. And Tim, it is great to see you again. We've got the book up right there. That's beautiful. That's the cover. Very nice. I got my own copy here. It's beautiful. When's the last time you and I saw each other?
Well, we were just talking beforehand. The Super Bowl the first Super Bowl that Dallas beat Buffalo in Pasadena, California.
I can't even remember when that was. It's like 35 years ago anyway, maybe 40.
I left after three quarters because I was hoping Buffalo would win, and I was so disappointed.
That, unlike what we're going to talk about tonight, that was not a memorable game.
Right.
But this was a memorable Olympics for Canada. And I want you to just sort of start us off by setting up the dilemma here. Canada went 50 years without winning Olympic gold, not since the Edmonton Mercuries of 1952. Why such a long stretch of futility?
Well, a big part of it was our best players were always in the NHL. We got by with Allen Cup teams that represented Canada winning gold, but then all of a sudden the Soviet Union produced the Big Red Machine, and that kept our amateurs on ice, if you will, in terms of winning. So that's why we went all those years. I'm from Kitchener-Waterloo, and I'm a little bit young to remember, but I do know my history, and I know some of the players from the team, the Kitchener-Waterloo Dutchmen, that played in 1956 and 1960 Olympics. They probably had a better shot at winning gold in 60, but they ran into a hot goaltender, Jack McCartan, who ended up playing senior hockey in Kitchener for the Kitchener-Waterloo Beavers a couple years after that. And if it was Jack's goaltending performance was one of the better ones the Olympics have ever seen, and that kept Canada to the silver medal. But then there was the time, Steve, too, Canada withdrew from the Olympics men's hockey competition because the IIHF was going to allow pros, and then Canada had a really good Izvestia tournament in the early 70s, and then they withdrew that. And back then the CHA, Canadian Amateur Hockey Association, was upset, so they withdrew and they didn't play in a couple of Olympics. And there was a couple of good close calls there when the national team came back in '92 and '94, but finally the NHLers were allowed back, and they didn't have any excuses anymore. And they didn't win the first time in '98, of course.
Well, let me pick up on that, okay? Yeah, I'll pick up on '98 because you're right. Canada went into those games in 1998 thinking they really had their first great shot in a long time for a gold medal. Remind us, what happened there?
Well, they ran into a hot goaltender, Dominik Hasek. Now, is that the only reason they didn't win? That team was really, unlike the team in Salt Lake City, that team in '98 really played well early. Looked like they were going to win the gold, but then all of a sudden they ran into some offensive problems, and some of that was Dominik Hasek, but we all saw what happened in the shootout. And really, that was the starting point for the win in 2002. I don't know if you wanted me to go right into Bobby
Not
Clarke.
yet. No, I still got a question about 1998 because, of course, the coach famously left Wayne Gretzky on the bench, and he did not participate in the shootout. And I wonder how often you still get asked about – I wonder how often Mark Crawford gets asked about, why didn't you let Gretzky take the shot?
He gets asked that a lot, and I take him at his word. They were prepared for a shootout. They had a sort of a lineup that the coaching staff and some members of the management team, which included Bobby Clarke and Bob Gainey, they had a game plan. And so, Mark can't be blamed just solely for the omitting Gretzky. And I know my friend Al Strachan has had an inside word that Andy Murray had a lot of input into. He was an assistant coach on the team. He had a lot of input because of his international hockey experience in terms of getting the lineup for the shootout. But I've been told it's a collective a decision by the group, and that's why he was named or left off. But really, there was never any reason why did you leave him off. Remember the old thing about Wayne had problems on breakaways, but when you get that many breakaways, I'm sure you're not going to score on all of them.
Well, to the extent that he was excluded in 1998, it was certainly not the case in 2002. He was selected to be the general manager, the executive director, whatever the title was, to pick the 2002 team, to lead the 2002 Team Canada into the Salt Lake Games. Who picked him?
Well, a lot of credit has to go to Bobby Clarke and Bob Gainey. They took the loss harder than anybody in '98, and not too long after, the two Bobs sat down and wrote a little bit of a paper on what went wrong, a debriefing session, if you will, Steve. And so Clarke flew up to Calgary and had a nice meeting with Bob Nicholson, who was then the CEO of Hockey Canada. And one of his suggestions was, I think you should get Wayne Gretzky involved in any capacity he wants to be involved in. Bobby Clarke and Bob Gainey were so impressed with Gretzky at the Olympic Games in Nagano. Every morning, the two Bobs would be in the athletes' village having a cup of coffee, a little breakfast, talking about the day's issues, and Gretzky would often join them. And they were just so surprised that we all know the guy has a brilliant hockey mind, but how much knowledge he had around the league, around the different rosters, different coaching systems. Even at that tournament, he knew what Sweden was trying to do, what Finland was trying to do, what Russia was trying to do. So Bobby Clarke came away impressed. And, the only problem was these recommendations were made in the summer of '98. And Gary Bettman and the NHL took their sweet time getting it organized, whether or not the NHL was going to continue its participation for Salt Lake City. So as soon as that was worked out, which was about 2 years out, so the year 2000, obviously Gretzky's retired now about a year. Nicholson flew down to California and had a real frank discussion with Gretzky. And again, he came away too, so impressed with Gretzky's hockey knowledge. This was a risk, right? Because Gretzky really hadn't done anything. He had a minority ownership in Phoenix. They were called the Phoenix Coyotes then, but he really wasn't part of the decision-making yet. So this was his first post-playing career foray back into the game.
And apparently he had one condition for taking the job. What was it?
He wanted to hire his good friend Kevin Lowe, as his assistant general manager, because not only were those guys great teammates, good leaders on those Edmonton Oilers teams, and I guess they later played together in New York. Kevin had that experience as a general manager or as an executive, and Gretzky always felt that they had the same sort of feel for what it takes to win, what kind of player you need in this sort of tournament. So that was his only condition.
Now, interestingly enough, Pat Quinn, who became the coach of the team, was not on Gretzky's short list of potential coaches. Yeah. So how did he get the job?
Well, there is a thing with Hockey Canada, and some people, especially from the East, the criticism is it's too much of the British Columbia mafia. That Nicholson's from British Columbia. But he knew Pat very well. Pat helped out on quite a bit of Hockey Canada programs. Always was there for Nicholson with advice. I've always thought, Steve, one of the great wastes that we, since Pat's passed away, we don't have a book of his hockey thoughts. How he coached and that sort of thing. There is a biography out there on him, which is great, by Dan Robson, but I thought Pat himself should have wrote a book about his hockey thoughts on, what it's like to be a coach, just some of his philosophies, because he was such a good communicator. Yourself, when you were down at Maple Leaf Gardens or later on Air Canada Centre, Scotiabank Arena now, and you would hear Pat after a game, after practice. I think he taught us all the game, or at least brought some of our knowledge up to a new level, because he just had a great way of explaining things. But yeah, just going back to, so one of the things they discussed, Bob says, we got to get around to talking coach. Who do you got, to Wayne? So they both wrote 4 names down on a piece of paper, and three names were similar. One was different on Nicholson's than Gretzky's. Wayne would not tell me who his 4th name was, but Pat Quinn was on Bob's list. And so Wayne was really inquisitive. Why would you have him on there? You know, that sort of thing. And Nicholson said, I love his philosophy of the game. I love his open, he plays a bit of more of an open game, not a checking game. I think it'll be conducive for the Olympics. I also think he's a player's coach, which he was. You need that in a short-term event. Anyway, it went on. They just left it there. The next day, though, they played a round of golf, and Russ Courtnall, who was Gretzky's neighbor at the time in California, joined them for the game, and they retired to the clubhouse for lunch after. And Gretzky said, "Hey Russ, who on these 2 lists of paper would you select as the head coach of the 2002 Canadian Olympic team?" And Russ didn't miss a beat. He goes, Pat Quinn. And it took Gretzky aback. And he goes, why was that? He goes, well, you know, I've really, out of all the coaches and general managers I've had in this league, and Russ played for a lot of different teams, Pat Quinn was the guy that treated men like men. And he said the other guy was Serge Savard at Montreal. And he goes, you know, he has a physical presence. So if he does have to speak up, the players are going to listen, but he's also a player's coach. And I think that's what you need in an event like this. And that's how Pat Quinn got the job.
Do you think it's possible that if Gretzky and Courtnall had not had that chance encounter, that Quinn might not have been picked?
I think so. You know, I could see a Glenn Sather being back there given one last chance. Probably not Mike Keenan, because you know, there was a bit of a kerfuffle in '87. I can't remember if that was Mike's last Canada Cup, but you know, he wasn't a player's coach, and you need that in a short-term event. But
right.
Yeah, you know, Ken Hitchcock was obviously, there was lots to choose from, because I think the previous 4 or 5 Stanley Cup winners were all Canadian coaches. Even like Larry Robinson was briefly there in New Jersey.
You mentioned Hitchcock, and he was just in that picture we saw a couple of minutes ago. He did stay as an assistant coach, but he'd just been fired by the Dallas Stars as their head coach. And I wonder if there was any awkwardness about him joining the team, having just been fired.
You know, Ken talked a bit about that. He was very good about it. I can't remember now. One of his friends gave him the suggestion, you know, just take a couple weeks off and then jump right into the Olympic job, because he did get a few offers. So what he did was he got out of town in Dallas. He had a connection in Vail, Colorado. That's where Dallas would host some of their training camps, and he became friends with somebody there who had a chalet or something like that. So he took his family, got out of there. Hockey Canada shipped him all kinds of video from the other countries. He started writing up game reports. You know what? It was Wayne Fleming who said, you know, why don't you use this time to really immerse yourself in the international game? And he did. And he went to the Olympics early. Was part of the opening ceremonies. Saw some of the old qualifying games that you would have to see. And you know, they did meet one of the teams in the semifinal, Belarus, who they were very familiar with because they saw him in the qualifying round. So it wasn't lost. But it was a very difficult time for Ken, because we all know how much he loves being behind a bench.
Mm-hmm. I do need to ask you about Mario Lemieux, because, of course, at this point, Lemieux had retired. He's in the Hall of Fame. He's part owner of the Pittsburgh Penguins. He's not playing anymore. And he ends up not only on the Team Canada roster, but he's the captain.
Yeah.
How did all that happen?
Well, he did come back just to play in the Olympics. You know, that was the big thing that he was missing. I didn't know this at the time when I sat down to read the book or write the book. Was you know, he hadn't been in a Canadian uniform since 1987 when he scored that famous goal in your hometown,
mm-hmm.
Gretzky to Lemieux. And so one of the reasons why he wanted to come back, he thought he had some unfinished business, and one of the pieces of unfinished business was playing in Olympic Games. And you know, we saw him come back. I think his first game was against Toronto just before Christmas time in 2000. And boy, did he! I think he got 5 points in that game, if I'm not mistaken. I know he got a point like within the first 2 minutes of the game, and so he really played well right out. people said he was in fabulous shape, but he did run into hip problems. There was a time during that 2002 season where his Olympic participation was in jeopardy because he had so much hip pain. In fact, after the first game against Sweden, it didn't go well. He sat out the second game to rest up for the rest of the tournament.
Who picked him as the captain?
Gretzky did. And it couldn't have been a better choice because, I learned a lot of things in talking to the guys about this tournament, but boy, I didn't realize how respected, especially the younger players, said Lemieux's actions and behavior was down in Salt Lake City. Like imagine you're a Jerome McGinley or a Simon Gagne or a Ryan Smith or an Eric Brewer, and all of a sudden you're placed on a team and you're playing against your heroes. That's not easy. You can retreat into the background, maybe not perform as well as you can. You're not relaxed. And Mario had this ability that the guys would tell me that he would go around the dressing room before practices, before games, at team dinners, at team breakfasts, and just sit with the young guys. And he would ask all kinds of questions just to get them involved, make them feel at ease.
We do need to remember, in terms of the historic timing of these Olympics, that they happened less than half a year after 9/11. So remind us what security was like when all the players eventually showed up at Salt Lake City.
Well, the only big sporting event, and maybe the only big event since 9/11, because a lot of things were canceled in the following weeks and months, was the Super Bowl, which was the Sunday before the opening ceremonies. So this was obviously a bigger scale because it was an event that went for 2.5 weeks. So security was really tight. In fact, Brad Pascal, who's now the assistant general manager of the Calgary Flames, but back then was the PR guru for Hockey Canada, told a funny story about how they were really worried because of all the checkpoints the athletes had to go through, not only at the venues, but when they got off team buses had to be checked, that sort of thing. So they tried to do their due diligence about how much time it was going to take to go from their dressing room at the rink at the East Center to go to the practice rink. And without any traffic or any checkpoints, it was not even 20 minutes. So they tried to budget 40 minutes, and they were still 20 minutes late for the first practice. And a lot of the players felt that not the fact that they were disorganized, just the rude awakening of the checkpoints, the security, being that first day, being excited. They were more than half the team played 2 nights before their opener, so they were just getting in that day. They had a long practice, a long video session, and they were just exhausted by the time the puck dropped for that opening game against Sweden. And they had to catch their breath after that.
Well, okay, since you've gone there, let's pick up the story there. The toughest decision that I guess Gretzky and company had to make is who's going to play goal. It's one thing to put line combinations together and so on, but who's going to play goal? Curtis Joseph of the Leafs ended up getting that first start, and it was a 5-2 loss to Sweden. So a couple of questions here. How did they decide Cujo was going to be the guy, and how shocked were they after such a bad loss?
Yeah. Well, I think, Steve, actually, we have to rewind to the following November, or the previous November, because one of the favorites to land the goaltending job was Patrick Roy. He was the best goalie in the game still at the time. He was just a few months removed from a Stanley Cup championship. And
he didn't want to play.
He didn't want to play. And he had a history of this with national teams. I want to be number one. I want to be guaranteed to be number one, or I don't play. And they wouldn't give him that guarantee. So, he waited till he also was having some hip problems that year, and he wanted to win back-to-back Stanley Cups for the first time in his career. And he thought, well, if I'm not going to be number one, I might as well rest and get prepared for the playoffs. But anyway, he waited for the Avalanche to get to the biggest stage on their sort of when they play in the United States, and that was New York. So he pulled Adam Foote and Alex Tanguay, who was also a candidate to make the team, and Joe Sakic aside, and said, I'm going to announce after the game that I'm pulling myself from consideration for the Olympic team. And so he did. So, that left...
it simplified matters a little bit, but now you've got a choice between Cujo, Eddie Belfour, and Martin Brodeur.
I think it was a pretty easy decision for the three goalies at the time, were Patrick, Curtis, and Martin Brodeur, because they had a hard time coming up with a third goalie. At the roster decisions in December, Belfour won out because Hitchcock said, "Don't worry, this guy can. If he has to be the number one, he can be the number one." The other guy that was up for consideration, because he was having the best season of them all, was Sean Burke, but he was a little old in the tooth at that time. And they Joseph Brodeur had a lot of international experience, especially, they were at the Olympics, so they knew what '98 was all about. They were the tandem in the '96 World Cup, so that's why they went with those three guys. Now, how Curtis was named number one, I think we can all figure that out. Pat was the head coach; he was very confident, and he did have a slightly better first 3 months that fall than Martin did. But we all know that Martin was a very capable goaltender too.
Well, as he showed in game 2, and okay, they lose the first game 5-2 to Sweden. The second game, it's a 3-2 victory over Germany, a team they probably should have beaten by 6 or 7 goals. And where do you think the team's confidence is after going 1-1 and really not looking all that great?
Yeah. Well, one of the guys that I really relied on for the temperature in the dressing room, because he's so bloody honest, was Adam Foote. And he sort of said that, Germany was a team that always gave Canada trouble at all different kinds of levels, whether it was the World Junior, Olympic Games, World Championships. I can't remember now. Was it a couple of years later, Germany might have upset them at a World Championship? But anyway, I know Switzerland was in the same sort of bracket. They played this neutral zone trap that gave Canada fits. And so he said the players weren't that nervous, but Bob Nicholson tells a much different story. Brad Pascal was driving a minivan back from, because that was their only game that wasn't in Salt Lake. It was in Provo. So I think it was a 40-minute drive. He said that, and Bob Nicholson said, that was the quietest drive he's ever been involved in. Everybody was, Gretzky was quiet, Steve Tambellini, Kevin Lowe, they were really nervous. And I think, I'm probably getting ahead of myself here. You can cut me off if you want. But one of the things that came shining through talking to all these guys is there's no panic on this team of the players, maybe even the coaching staff. The management side, a little different. And Joe Sakic tells a great story one day, how he's coming in after that poor performance against Sweden. A lot of the guys said it was another poor performance against Germany because they were expected to dominate them. He remembers coming in for the game against Czech Republic, which was the third game, and he saw Gretzky and Nicholson and Tambellini and Lowe huddling in the bowels of the arena. And he goes, "Why all the nervous faces?" This is Joe talking now. "We've got this. Don't worry, guys."
That's confidence. Well, okay. Having said that, Cujo loses the first game. Brodeur wins the second game. So Pat's going to stick with the winning hand. Yeah. And I wonder how much he knew that by picking Brodeur over his own goaltender, Curtis Joseph, that was probably going to damage his relationship with his goalie when he returned to the NHL after the Olympics.
I think he had an inkling, because I know that the rest of the coaching staff did. And, Hitchcock especially was, "Pat, you got a free agent on your hand." He says, "Ken, let me worry about that. I'm going to think about it today." And I think Gretzky also had a lot of input into it, because after the falter of the first game, and a lot of the players really stuck up for Cujo, because they said they really felt bad that he lost his number one position because they weren't ready, how badly they played. But Gretzky I know Gretzky went, because Brodeur told me this. Gretzky went to Marty after that first game and says, "Okay, the plan was that you're playing tomorrow, so it's now your tournament. Just keep winning." And that's, with the exception of the tie to Czech Republic, which we all know Canada did outplay the Czechs in that game. Marty was the guy then after that.
Well, okay. 3 games, you got 1 win, 1 tie, and 1 loss. Yeah. You telling me this team felt good about where it was at that point in the tournament?
No, in fact, I guess I should just rewind a bit. Pat didn't have a great relationship when things were going bad with reporters, and we were all pressing him. Who's going to start game 3? Who's, is Curtis back in goal? Because I don't know, maybe Eddie will get a chance. I remember, I think it was the Ottawa Sun went with that story, like Belfour maybe the goalie, and it was just him being flippant, but it muddled the waters. And yeah, you're right. Look, game 3, even though the result was 3-3, again, everybody's wondering what is going on here with Canada and Olympic hockey. It doesn't seem to be getting any better. The old saying for Canadians at hockey tournaments, let's just get better every game, every period, and hopefully be there in the end. Well, it wasn't getting better. In fact, Canada needed a really nice play by Theo Fleury to set up Joe Nieuwendyk fairly late in that game to eke out a tie. Now, it wasn't going to mean they weren't going to make the playoff round because they already had guaranteed a spot, but boy, did that goal give them a lift, because if they weren't going to gain a tie from a fairly solid performance, it was going to start to sink in again, much like it did 4 years earlier in Nagano. What do we have to do to score in this tournament? We've got all these offensive wizards and we can't score.
Well, what happened next may have been more important and more impressive than anything that had happened in the previous 3 games. And you know what I'm talking about. Let's see Wayne Gretzky at a press conference after game 3. Glenn, if you would.
They don't like us, and we got to get that same feeling towards them. I mean, right now it's comical to listen to things that are being said. Almost sickens my stomach to turn the TV on, because I'm such a proud Canadian and such a fan of our game, and very proud of all the players in our locker room. And it makes me ill to hear some of the things that are being said about us. Am I hot? Yeah, I'm hot. Because I'm tired of people taking shots at Canadian hockey. And when we do it, we're hooligans. And when Europeans do it, it's okay, because they're not tough or they're not dirty. That's a crock of crap.
That last part being a reference to a dirty hit by a Czech player late in the game. Tim, where did that come from?
Well, he was upset. He would have liked to seen those first 3 games go a little bit easier for his team. They did not. But he also, he said 20 years later, looking back at this, one of the things he had in the back of his head was, at that point, the Americans were the best team in the tournament. And all he could think about, like being a historian like he was, here we go again. The U.S. is going to win gold at home. They did it in 1960 in Squaw Valley. They did it in 1980 in Lake Placid, and they're going to do it again in Salt Lake City. So he was really nervous about that. But, there's so many factors involved in the rant. Kevin Lowe takes partial blame for it, because the BlackBerry was just a new device back in those days in 2002, and Kevin had one. And he somehow figured out how to get the internet. And he was reading some of the newspaper stories from the States and from Canada about, Canada's performance. And there was a lot to criticize those first 3 games. And he was feeding these to Gretzky in their morning get-togethers. And it just built up over the first week. And Gretzky just let a lot of steam out. And, it was triggered by Roman Hamrluck's cross-check on Fleury, who landed on Hasek, and then there was a little bit of there's a big little bit of a scuffle there in front of the crease, and Fleury got it a few more times, but that was his job, right? That's why Gretzky picked him for the team, because he could disrupt the other team's flow and stuff. It just happened to be at the end of the game, and that's what caught Gretzky's eye, and he went into a press conference 10 minutes later and continued to express his feelings.
Did the Team Canada players know about the Gretzky rant?
No, not really. It's funny to, you ask them about that. They had no idea until either the next day, or some didn't even know about it until after the tournament, when friends and family would ask them, what did you think about this and that? So then they had to go back and watch a highlight of it. I don't think this was as great as Phil Esposito's 1972 post-game interview with Johnny Esau, but that talk was, I think there were 2 weeks that evolved from the game 4 in Vancouver to the first game in Moscow. So there was lots of time to discuss it. Canada was back on the ice the next day for practice, and then 2 days later for a game. So because they didn't see this, the internet wasn't really a massive, or social media, I guess, wasn't really a massive thing like it is now. There wasn't much to talk about amongst the players. They were just trying to get, okay, how can we build off this game? We got a really tough one against Finland. They were another team that were playing well, very inspired. Timo Solani was one of the best players in the game at the time. So how do we shut this guy down? That's what they were focused on.
They did beat Finland by 1 goal. The bigger story, I guess, was Russia knocking out Dominik Hasek and the Czechs. So they were gone. Belarus had a huge upset over Sweden. So the Swedes were out. So a couple of the big countries in the tournament are now out. But the next big thing that caught my eye was Team Canada men going to watch Team Canada women play their gold medal game. The men went to watch the women. What was the significance of that?
Well, I didn't know it at the time. I think Brad Pascal told me that they really tried to get the men's and women's teams on the same page. They really thought they could benefit from each other, getting to know each other.
There's Eric Lindros and Steve Smith.
Yeah, that's right. Ryan Smith.
Ryan Smith, sorry, yeah.
Some of the women probably had more Olympic experience. I'm trying to think now when their first one was. Were they a demonstration sport in '94? Well, anyway, a lot of international experience. What they did was they held the orientation camp the previous September at the same time for the women's and men's team in Calgary. And near the end, they had a big dinner at one of the big steakhouses downtown. And, everybody got along so well. They talk about how that night spilled over to a nightclub across the street, an infamous nightclub called Cowboys. It's no longer there. A lot of hangovers the next day. I did interview Haley Wickenheiser for the book because, she had great recall about that night. And she said, I was so upset the next day. Our coach made us do a 5K run before practice. Their coach delayed practice by 2 hours so they could sleep in a bit and nurse their hangovers. But that's why all the men showed up to the women's game, sitting up in the corner and boo. I don't know if you can get the YouTube clips, but during the game, you can see them booing. Do you remember the referee in that game? I think.
We're going to talk about it with the members of Team Canada Women's later in our program tonight.
Yeah. So it's just not to 6 straight calls against them, and Canada killed them all off. And the emotion was there for the men, and probably the most guy that got emotional was Pat Quinn, though.
You know what? Pat Quinn went down to the women's bench with tears in his eyes after the Canadian women won gold. What was that about? Well,
Haley recalled that. I didn't know that story. And she said that she remembers, after this picture here of the celebration, she remembers getting up and taking a look over at the bench, seeing Pat with tears streaming down his face. And so he was very emotional. He was so proud that the women, stuck through it and persevered through all the bad calls and stuff. And later that night, they went out for a steak dinner on the outskirts of town in Salt Lake City. It was Ryan Smith's birthday, in fact. And so when the cake came around, Pat just stood up and wanted to say a few words about the next few days. And he said, "You know what, guys, I think we found the secret to success. Over our next 2 games, we want to play like women." And he kept using that line the last few days of the tournament. And it not only relaxed the guys, but it was true because they did really show that Canadian heart that we're supposed to be known for.
That can't be a pep talk that any men's hockey coach has ever given any men's hockey team in the history of hockey. But he did it before the gold medal game against the Americans. He said, "Go out there and play like women."
Yeah, that was part of his pregame speech remarks. And Pat pulled out a couple of neat little things that he just to keep the guys relaxed. And I can't remember was for the Germany game or for the Czech game, but there was a commercial, Steve, before the Olympics and during the Olympics. It was a Molson Canadian commercial, and it shows a bus full of Canadian Olympic fans going across the border, and the U.S. security guy says, "Anything to declare?" And one of the guys stands up and says, "Just a big old can of whoop ass." I don't know if you remember that.
But, I sure do.
So Pat did was he got a trainer to get an aerosol can, and he put white tape on the outside and put whoop ass. And yeah, I remember he said, I tried it out on Gretzky first. I said, we've got a big old can of whoop ass. This is what I'm going to. So anyway, it worked. It got the players laughing and that sort of thing. So, it just shows you it's not all a business, an event like this. You got to relax and enjoy the moment. And, Pat made sure of that. He was great like that. He could enjoy a moment like that.
In that gold medal game against the United States, one of the most astonishing goals, let me rephrase that. One of the most astonishing assists I've ever seen was Mario Lemieux not touching the puck. Now, those who have seen the goal will know what I'm talking about. For those who don't remember it, who didn't see it, you got to describe what happened, because I don't know about you, but I'd never seen anything like that before.
No, me either. Well, he did. A lot of people didn't think that Mario did not get an assist on that play because he didn't touch the puck, but he actually fed it to Pronger, who brought it up the sideboards, and Pronger saw Mario streaking through the slot, slid a pass through to him in the slot, but Mario let it go through his legs, froze the goalie, Richter, and it went right to Paul Kariya, who had half an open net, and he sunk it, and it was a good big goal because the Americans got off to a lucky start with a bad bounce to Tony Amonte to put them up 1-0, and this tied the game at 1-1. And I didn't get a chance to talk to Mario for the book. I was told right from the outset that he's a bit of a recluse these days and doesn't do many interviews and that sort of thing. And I thought I could pull a favor in from Jimmy Rutherford, who was back in those days running the Penguins, and he just said, "Look, my hands are tied here. He's just not around. I couldn't get him to talk to you." So, but you know what? I'm glad I didn't talk to him, because Paul Kariya had such a vivid memory of that goal, and he said it was almost like a sixth sense out there. He knew Mario was going to let that pass go through to him, and he just said, "Great players make great plays," and that was one of Mario's greatest plays. And that's one of the reasons why I think this team is so underrated or doesn't get the attention it deserves. There was no Paul Henderson moment, or even Daryl Sittler in '76, or Gretzky to Lemieux like in '87. But that goal was pretty spectacular, even though it wasn't really at a dramatic part of the game.
Now, there's a little piece of art we just decided to put up there. Danny Rios Farrell, who's a friend of this program, did that piece of art, and it, of course, depicts the moment that you've been talking about here. I don't know how Kariya could possibly have known that Lemieux was going to let that puck go right through him to Kariya. I mean, that had never happened before. How could he have known that would happen?
Well, that's why we're doing this job, and they have Hall of Fame careers.
Right on. Okay, in the dressing room in the first intermission, Mario Lemieux got everyone's attention with one word. You remember what he said and what the circumstances were?
Enough. There was somebody, and I couldn't. That's another thing. The brotherhood of this team, they wouldn't rat on anybody. We could all try to imagine who it would be, but because there weren't many outlandish personalities on this team. In fact, again, that's why I like them. They're such a quiet bunch, good leadership on ice. But yeah, somebody was mouthing off about a missed call in the last minute, and so Lemieux just looked over at the guy and said enough, and the whole room went silent, and then they started focusing on the second period. So yeah, it was I'm glad the guy that told that story, I think it was Ryan Smith. Well, Ryan might have been the first player that told me, but then I got a lot of verification from other guys, and yeah, and it was a real turning point, because as good as Canada played in that third period to sort of run away with the game, they really needed a strong second period. They couldn't let the States back in the game after that big Kariya goal, and that's just what happened.
Talk to us about Pat Quinn's second intermission locker room speech. What did he have to say?
Yeah, I think Michael Peca called it the best piece of coaching he's ever seen. But like Hitchcock, he always cares about leadership and that sort of thing. And he was one of the first coaches I can ever remember telling me about. It's no longer the captain that's the leader of a team. It's a leadership group, and you try to have a veteran, a defenseman, a forward, maybe even a goalie, a rookie, like different representatives of the different players on your team, because you want a bunch of the guys to sell what you're trying to sell to them. And so anyway, he was just after that. After I think was it 3-2, Steve? They were leading or 2-2. I can't remember, but
Can't remember.
yeah, he was listening to some of the players talk before they were going to come out and just say a few final words. And he said to Pat, he goes, "These guys are saying exactly what we wanted them to say. You know, they're like 23 coaches. We couldn't have an easier job." So Pat had all these notes on paper and stuff, and he came out and he looked at Lemieux and he looked at Sakic and he looked around the room and he took his papers and he crumpled them up and threw them into the garbage and he said, "I think you guys know what to do."
What a moment, eh?
Yeah.
What a moment.
I'm
Would you
starting
love to
tear
have
up.
been there?
Yeah. Pretty
You
cool.
mentioned Joe Sakic. Joe Sakic had 2 goals and 4 points in the gold medal game, and he'd won a Stanley Cup 9 months earlier. How do you explain that much success in that short a space of time?
Well, best player in the game, I think, at the time, Steve. You know, another good story about quiet leadership comes from Joe Sakic's actions. After the first game, Quinn shuffled the lines. And so Sakic went from playing on a line with Mario Lemieux and Steve Yzerman, 2 of his heroes. And he comes back to practice the day after and sees his new line mates are 2 young punks, Simon Gagne and Jerome McGinley. Now, we all know those guys had great careers, but they were still finding their way. They had to have really good starts to their season just to be chosen on that roster. And so McGinley and Gagne thought, "Oh my God, this guy's going to be upset." Like he went from playing with Lemieux and Yzerman to playing with us. And Joe didn't miss a beat. As soon as the 2 guys, Smith and Gagne and McGinley caught his eye in the dressing room before practice, he walked right over to them and said, "Hey guys, notice we're playing the same color sweater, playing on the same line in practice. I'm so excited about this, playing with you guys. Let's talk a bit before we go out there. Let's get to know each other and let's have some fun and try to be the best line the rest of the tournament." And they may not have been the best line, but if they weren't the best line, they were certainly the best line in that last 2 periods of that gold medal game.
Owen Nolan leaves the Team Canada bench with 2 minutes to go. Where did he go?
He went to the dressing room to get his handheld camera. You know, I guess he had this in his head that he was going to film this and show it to family. Like he doesn't even know where the camera is now. So, you know, if he had to get it for us right now, he said it's in some box, but he did use it to show family and friends after. And he was a bit of not an odd duck, but he was a bit of a free thinker, right? Remember, he pointed at the
Hasek.
Dominic Hasek in the All-Star game. He'd like to have his fun. Well, he's got a lot of Irish blood in him, so that's cool too, from Belfast. And that's what he did. And I think I asked him. I know I asked him, you know, what would you have done if Quinn tapped you on the shoulder for one last shift? He goes, "I knew I wasn't going to be called for one last shift." So, you know, that line was Nolan, Lindros, and was Pekka the other guy? And, Ryan Smith. They were on the ice for the first goal, I think, but boy, did they ever shut down the big guns. I think they were up against the Brett Hull line in that game. And Hull's basically his only chance in the game was on a power play, so they weren't killing penalties. Brodeur had to make a good save there early in the 3rd period, but they don't get enough credit, that line, of how well they also shut down the Americans in that final game.
People may not remember, but the coach behind the American team bench was Herb Brooks from Miracle on Ice fame. He would die a year and a half after these games in a car accident. Did you ever get to meet him during your career?
I didn't, but a good friend of ours, John Shannon, was a very good friend of Herb's. And I know how highly John thought of Herb, and good hockey man. And again, going back to that Gretzky rant, that was another part of why he thought the Americans were going to win. Here's Herb Brooks coming back for one last miracle on ice and that sort of thing. But, it didn't work out that time, but boy, they sure made it tough on the Canadians.
After the Team Canada victory, Pat Quinn hauls his daughter from the stands onto the ice for the team picture at center ice. Why did he do that? You take a swig of water. Go ahead. You've been talking a lot.
Callie's what a great person. She filled in a lot of holes in this book. I really appreciated her time, and I think she was so. I haven't got contact with her about what that the book is about, because she kept bugging me. When's the book coming out? When's the book coming out? But so Callie loves hockey. She was an athlete herself, and she was a good swimmer. And I can't remember, it was the '98 Olympics. She almost made the Canadian team. Was like by a fraction of a second, she missed out on her discipline, and she always wondered what did she miss out on Olympic Games. So she went on to a career. She was David Poyle's executive assistant with the Nashville Predators for years, and one of the recommendations in '98 that Clark and Gainey came up with is, we have to take better care of our family and friends that come to the games, because I found a lot of the players were distracted, making sure their mom, their dad, their sister, their wife, their kids got tickets to different events, and they shouldn't have to be worrying about that. So to Bob Nicholson's credit, he came up with this thing about, let's get somebody to lead the parents and friends and family contingent. So Callie Quinn was the perfect person for that. She wanted to be an Olympian. She had a lot of experience in this sort of thing. So she was hired for the job. Poyle was nice enough to give her a leave, and she took care of this. I think there were 176 people in the party that she had to take care of. And one of the things was to sort of navigate a brief meeting of the players and this group after each game, that sort of thing. And that was basically the only contact, other than maybe you had a free moment for a lunch or something like that, that the players had with their family and friends. So Pat was very proud of Callie and the role she played, and she didn't. So sorry. I guess you're getting about the security guard, right? I can't remember his name. He's a retired cop, but Pat knew him from his days in Vancouver. Wanted him as their security guy. He told the security guy just before the game was about to end, go up and get my wife and 2 daughters. I want them down here at the bench. And so they came down, and that's when he grabbed Callie to go on the ice. And she didn't want to go on. Dad, no, this is your team. This is your spotlight. Nope, come on. You're a big part of the team. You're coming on. So it's if you look at that picture, you see her, and it's kind of unique that a father and a daughter got to share that moment.
Well, one of the great pieces of legend that came out of this series was what we all discovered was buried under center ice after it was all said and done. What's that about?
Well, the Lucky Looney. In fact, we could go back to the women's game to tell a little sidebar on that, Steve. The women knew about it somehow because Trent Evans, and I'll get into that later on, he's the guy responsible for it. A lot of people think it's a guy named Dan Craig, but no, it was Trent Evans. They knew about the Looney, and they were about to dig it up. And I can't remember, was it somebody got to them and said, hey, you got to leave it in there for 3 more nights. We still got another game to play. But you see the dime there, okay? So they noticed Trent is an Edmonton Ice guru. He worked under Dan Craig in the Oilers days. And when Dan got hired to do the ice for the Olympics, he brought Trent down as his number 2 guy. And they realized just before those qualifying games were about to start that, and they were about to paint the ice because they were different measurements back in the international game in those days. Same ice surface, because the East Center did have an international ice surface, but they had to repaint the lines. So you need to mark the center ice, and usually it's done with a quarter or something like that. So what you'd have to do is drill down, I think it was half an inch, maybe an inch. And you have to have something underneath so the point stays level. So Dan had a dime on him. But then he thought to himself, we should put a Looney in here, being a Canadian guy and stuff. So he asked his assistant, do you have a Looney on you? He goes, no. So they delayed it so he could go back so Dan could go back to his hotel room that night. And then he found a Looney in one of his pairs of pants. Came back the next morning, and then they marked center ice with that Looney, and they kept it really quiet. Not too many people knew about it. The players didn't know about it. I don't know how the women's team found out. I should have asked Haley about that. Maybe you can ask the 3 wonderful women you're going to have on after me here, how they found out. But Kevin Lowe knew about it, and he knew Trent from the Oiler days, and he introduced Trent to Gretzky, and so they revealed the story to the players after the gold medal game. In fact, there weren't too many people allowed in that dressing room after. And Bettman came in to give Joe Sakic the MVP award. Then after Bettman left, Gretzky and Lowe brought Trent Evans in, and they had already dug it up. And I think Gretzky made a speech, something like, "This is going into the Hockey Hall of Fame." And Trent still has the dime, but I can't remember where he said it. He's kept it. I think it's a safety deposit box. But Roy McGregor's wrote a more detailed book, smaller book, a lot shorter book, but it's like I think it's like a children's book, the Legend of the Loonie.
Yes, about the Loonie, right?
Yeah. And
Tim, you've been great with your time. Let me ask you two more quick questions, and then we got one of the Team Canada gold medal women's players standing by, ready to come in next. We're going to play a little Jeopardy here, okay? I'm going to give you the answer, and you're going to give me the question, okay? Here's the answer. The answer is Ken Morrow, Steve Yzerman, and Brendan Shanahan. What's the question?
Who are three players who won the gold medal first, and then 3 or 4 months later won a Stanley Cup in the same calendar year?
Isn't that amazing, eh?
It is.
That's success.
And
Good for you.
Can I go on about this one a little bit?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. Brendan Shanahan played the last 2 games with a broken thumb. Had to sit out, I think, the next 2 games when he got back to Detroit. Steve Yzerman, he knew he shouldn't have played that last game. In fact, Kenny Lowe, the trainers, or Kevin Lowe's brother, said to Gretzky, if this wasn't the gold medal game, I'd tell Yzerman to sit it out. He was playing it just on one leg. He didn't play again until the playoffs, or maybe the last 2 games of the regular season. That summer, he had to have a real sort of obscure surgery to correct it was called realignment surgery. No hockey player had ever gone through it. I think Mike Van Ryn of Leafs fame years later did, but it was such a rare operation for a hockey player. I don't know if Yzerman he had such a great playoffs that year. It just shows you how much grit he had in him. And, he was a real true captain, but because of his on-ice display.
Tim, last question. An impossible question, but let's put it out there anyway. 14 Hall of Famers on this team. Yeah. Was this, in your judgment, the best Team Canada ever?
Well, boy, they're hard to compare. But, I would say right up there, because Fleury, Adam Foote, Curtis Joseph, I think, I know you guys love to argue these things on Hockey Hall of Famers, but those are 3 guys I think waiting to go in. So, if they could get those 3 in, probably was the best group of players to ever play in a tournament together. The thing that I look at is the talent up front. About back, there's some names that stick out. Niedermayer for me, Rob Blake, Pronger, Al McGuinness, but they didn't have the depth that some of the other teams did. Like that 76 team had a great depth of 5, 6 guys that were really top-notch blue liners. That 87 team, with Dale Hawerchuk, a lot of people forget that he won the face-off to allow Gretzky and Lemieux to go down the ice and score that last-second goal. So it's tough to compare. And then the 2014, that was the last Olympics I was at. Have I ever seen a dominant defensive job, skating job that those guys did, goaltending job that Carey Price? So like I said, it's like the old saying, if you're a father or a parent trying to choose a favorite kid, those Hockey Canada teams have really given us a lot of great moments.
For sure. As have you, Tim, in this book, which I really enjoyed a great deal. It's called Gold, How Gretzky's Men Ended Canada's 50-Year Olympic Hockey Drought. And we're so glad that it has brought you to our Hockey Time Machine show tonight. Thanks so much.
Well, thanks so much, guys, for having me on. I really appreciate the time and the support for the book.
Terrific. Tim Ormsby coming to us tonight from Toronto. Let's go just a little bit west of Toronto for our next guest right now. Joining us from Mississauga, Ontario, about 40 minutes west of Toronto, Sammy Jo Small, 3-time Olympian, 5-time world champion goalie, and there she is in Mississauga. Hello, Sammy Jo. How are you tonight?
I'm great. How are you doing, Steve?
Super. All the better for seeing you. Now, a bit of an odd first question to get us started here. When did Samantha Small, born in Manitoba, become Sammy Jo?
Great question. So I was actually always Sammy Jo. My parents wanted to name me. My dad read a book when he was little called Sam Small and the Ugly Tyke, and he wanted to name me after that. He liked how Sam Small rung off the tongue. And my mom's sister's name was Jo, short for Joanne. So it was always Sammy Jo, but my grandparents didn't think that that was a proper name. So they had to put Samantha on the birth certificate. And that was the first and last time that they ever called me Samantha.
There we
so
go.
I know if it's the government calling or people for taxes, because then it's the proper name.
Mystery resolved. Okay, good to know. All right, let me take you back 20 years ago, Salt Lake City. Your team had lost 8 straight to the Americans going into those games, and now you're playing in the gold medal game on their home ice. Did you really think you could win the gold?
For sure we did. I mean, I think anybody that's ever seen a Canada-US game knows that it's there's always drama and there's always a story. And no matter if one team jumps out ahead or if a team has lost 8 straight games, there is always a possibility that it can be won by anyone. And so I think we had that belief within our dressing room. We knew that a lot of the games were very close. Some had gone into overtime. So the possibility of winning was always there. And I think, you know, I say during my speeches, I do a lot of corporate events now. And I often say that sometimes in failure is when you learn the most about yourself, but it's also more importantly, when you learn the most about the people around you. You know, how do they react to these situations? Do they need a shoulder to cry on? Do they need a kick in the pants? What is it that they need? And how can I be the best teammate to the people around me? And I think had we not gone through maybe all of those challenges and that adversity, we might not have learned that about each other. So when we ended up in what was a very challenging final game, it's almost like the challenges were nothing like what we had experienced all year, and we were used to them. And we were able to kind of stay the course with the ideas that the coaches had and with sort of the yearly plan that they had us all focused on.
Well, you used the word challenging there, which is a nice diplomatic way of saying the officiating was horrendous. And we talked about it, Tim and I, in our last interview. The officiating in that gold medal game was, well, we got a little clip here. Let me take you back. Glenn, if you would, let's play that clip. There's Glenn.
Instead of the clip, you get me, which is really disappointing. But during the Becky interview,
right,
I think we use that clip that's coming up. So I don't have it prepared to play now as well. The clips I have are the last second goal, the Haley Wickenheiser.
Oh, okay. Well, don't give away. We're gonna keep a few things.
Don't give it away, but I can certainly talk about the refereeing if you like.
I thank you, Glenn, for that explanation. And Sammy Jo, yes, I think it was. Well, was it 6 penalties in a row, and some of them were absolute dogs? What did that do to the team's mood?
So interestingly enough, I didn't realize this until I actually wrote my book and went through the game, is that the Americans actually had the first 4 or 5 penalties awarded to them. So it was very one-sided in the first period, and we did have some power plays. And then it went on something like an 8 or 9 streak penalty calls for against us. And what was, what was tough about the situation is, refs are people, and the referee at the time, to me, just looked like she was nervous and, perhaps a little bit in over her head. We played a very aggressive game, and penalties that I think should have been called were not called. And then penalties that were very light and, perhaps normally would not have got called were almost like makeup calls for previous infractions. So it was just what made it strange was not the amount of penalties, in my opinion. I mean, looking back at it now and having gone through it, the minutia of the actual game, but the way in which she called the penalties, that's what made it almost absurd. Was that, for instance, Jennifer Botterill would go in and get in a physical play with a player, and then 2 seconds later, somebody else might come in, do something, and then the penalty would have occurred, but then Jennifer Botterill is suddenly in the box, even though she was not on the ice when the infraction happened. So things like that just, she got the numbers wrong. She got, it wasn't really, I think had it been us taking bad penalties, then I think there would have been much more banter on the bench. There would have been much more dissent within the bench. But because it was just seemed absurd and it just wasn't really what was happening on the ice, I think that all of us as players kind of realized that this is just another challenge that we're just going to have to overcome together. And for sure, there was, people yelling and screaming on the bench. But our coaching
Give us an example, Sammy Jo. What did people say? Give us an example.
Well, I think that, I'm not going to repeat some of the words that were said, but often in those situations, players will scream at the referee. And the coaching staff did a good job of ensuring that it was them that took the brunt of it and that it was not us screaming at the referee. So I think it was, a very quiet bench. And when penalties happened, you could see players sarcastically clapping for the referee on the ice, things like that we did that luckily we didn't get an extra penalty. However, it meant that on the bench, the mood changed from us complaining about it. And it was more about, okay, our penalty killers are about to go. Let's give them our best. Let's get behind them. They really were the unsung heroes of that game. And, you talked to Becky earlier. Becky Keller, must have logged, 35, 40 minutes in that game. She really was a defensive defenseman, unheralded for her expertise, but in that game called upon way more than she probably would have been expected to because we were on the PK so much. But it made all the players get behind and the penalty kill and really find momentum every time that we killed off a penalty and then another penalty. And there was some coincidental minors that happened as well along the way. So the Americans were getting penalties. It just was at the same time as us. So
Gotcha.
We didn't have another power play.
I'd like you, if you would, to take us into the dressing room during the second intermission. Jayna Hefford has scored with 1 second left to go in the second period. What a lift that must have been. What was the dressing room like in the second intermission?
Yeah, certainly the team was very excited. When a goal like that happens in the final seconds of a period, it certainly shifts the momentum and it made us go up 3-1 at that point. And so I think the belief was very strong in the dressing room. That was not necessarily the case after the first period. And after the first period, there was a lot of, there was dissent, I would say, within the dressing room. There's people angry and frustrated that so many penalties were being called and that it seemed like the referee was against us. And I think the most special thing happened at that moment was one of our quietest players, Dana Antel, who from Esterhazy, Saskatchewan, didn't say much all season, prolific goal scorer, but is not really one of the well-known Team Canada players. She stood up in the dressing room and she said the words Emerald Lake. And Emerald Lake to us was significant because it was our final retreat that we took as a team without any of the coaching staff, and a chance for just the players to really unite as players and to get to know each other away from the hockey rink and to really be there for each other. And I think when she said those words, it made us all realize that this is the moment that we have trained for 4 years and that we are all here to support each other. And however we can do that, whatever roles are given to us, which are very different than we thought they were going to be when we entered the game, that we have to play our roles to the best of our abilities. And so to have somebody like her who normally does not stand up and say something, I think that really calmed the team and it focused us and it centered us. And we had a really great second period, culminating with Jayna Hefford's goal right at the end of the second period. And so going into the third, there was certainly lots of excitement, but I think there was way more momentum and way more belief that we could actually do this if we just stayed the course. And the difference in the dressing room at that point was just almost like, not like we had won it already, but that we could possibly win it.
Well, you did. And here's what it looked like. Glenn, if you would.
Campbell, far side, Goyette, coming into the middle, in the slot, shot, rebound, Wickenheiser scores!
Cassie Campbell she can catch Danielle Goyette on the fly. Goyette gets, but look at this rebound. Wickenheiser jumps off the bench, realizes it, takes off, and look at her just power in. She is a tough one to stop if she's barreling down on the puck.
Brousseau in behind the goal, the dying seconds. There's 8 left in the period. Again, down the ice, long pass. Here's a chance for Hibbert.
On 4-on-4, there's so much ice out there that I was just like, I'm going to take off, you know. So I just left the zone, and I knew we had control of the puck. And Becky Keller made a great pass, got her head up, and the U.S. defenseman did get a piece of the puck, but not enough, so it got through her. And once I grabbed it out of the air and I threw it down, and it was a little too far ahead of me, and I think that's what caused Sarah DaCosta to poke check at me.
With 1 second to go in the period.
No, that's the 1 second to go goal. Glenn, have we got the last seconds of the third period?
Again, StreamYard limits us to 100 different photos or videos.
Okay, good
We
enough.
already had that in the taped interview we're going to play. I had to get rid of it.
It's okay, Glenn. It's okay. I'm going to get back to Sammy Joe here. I want to know, Sammy Joe, when the horn sounds and you've won that gold, your first victory over the Americans in 9 games now, what's the thing that stays with you the most 20 years later?
Good. I mean, great question. I didn't play in the final game. I sat on the bench. So for me, it was a much different feeling than had I played in the game. You know, I was one of the first ones to jump over the boards and jump on top of Kim St. Pierre. There she is.
You were on top of the pile, no doubt about it.
Right. And so certainly the excitement of our team being victorious and us accomplishing the goal we wanted to accomplish, that stays with me. But, you know, when you are placed in a role that you don't necessarily want to be in as a goaltender that's sitting on the bench, or, you know, somebody that's not getting much ice time, you have to find value. And so how I found value during the game was attempting to live vicariously through my teammates and their big moments. And my roommate that year, and still one of my best friends, is Jennifer Botterill, and she was on the ice in those final seconds. So what was I thinking in those final seconds really to me was just how special this moment must be for Jennifer, and how much trust, and that's Jennifer on the right there, and how much trust and that the coaches put in her, and that this was a memory that she was going to have forever. And so I really tried to live through them in their big moments and live it as if I was going through it. But it was different, a different feeling. You know, it certainly was different than had I played in the game. And yes, you still are a part of the team. And I still am so proud and feel incredibly privileged to have been a part of 20 amazing women on this team. But it is a different feeling because you didn't create perhaps the big saves or do the things that you had envisioned that you would have done. But I certainly knew this was a big moment for Canadian hockey history, and to have been a part of it, even though it was a small part, is something I'm forever proud of.
Were you not concerned that you were going to crush your goaltending colleague, Kim St. Pierre?
Well, in fact, I don't know if you saw the replay when you showed it to Becky, but she did hit her head pretty hard on the post when she got cranked. The very first couple people, Haley and Geraldine, that jumped on her, kind of sent her flying back. And so that evening when we were celebrating our victory, she wasn't really able to celebrate with many beverages. She wasn't feeling the greatest after the game. So I don't think it was a big pileup. It was that first initial contact. She got sent back and flying back. But 20 years later, I'm sure that's the least of her concerns at this moment.
Right. Let me bring you to present day. Did you watch? Listen, I imagine you must have watched. Did you stay up till 2 a.m. and watch the women win the gold this year?
I was actually in Beijing covering the game in the venue.
Fantastic. Could you compare the two?
In what way? From the team perspective or from a feelings perspective?
No, from if this team that won the gold medal this year had to play the team that won the gold medal 20 years ago, what do you think would happen?
Oh, I mean, the teams that Canada beat double digits would have beaten our team in 2002. I mean, the teams, yeah, there I am covering the games in the venue. The teams that that Canada beat in double digits this year could have beaten the Vancouver team. I mean, that's just how far women's hockey has come. And I don't think people really appreciate that, because they still see Canada and the US on top. But the reality is that the opportunities for women and girls in hockey nowadays is so much more than we ever had. And so, our skills and our abilities were not the same as they are currently. Also, technology and just the way athletes train, the way that they have sports science on their side with the advantageous sticks and the equipment, and just everything is so different. And so I don't think that the game would be even close if the two teams played. However, if you were to maybe compare the feelings that Canadians had, I think it's very similar, because it's coming off of a silver medal performance. And so anytime that you get to be the underdogs, I think is really, it's special to win as the underdog. It's sometimes harder to win when you've been on top for a long time. I've been often asked in the last couple of weeks if this is perhaps the greatest women's hockey team we've seen, the most dominant. And I feel like they were extraordinary at the Olympic Games for sure, but it still was a close game at the end. I think perhaps the most dominant team was the 2006 team, simply because that's the team there. We really steamrolled over the competition, and we ended up playing Sweden in the final game. So the Americans were not as strong that year. And so that team was perhaps more dominant, but that doesn't mean that they were a better team than this year's team. Every team has its own moments and its own sort of raison d'etre, I guess. And sometimes the story tells itself. And the Salt Lake City team by no means was dominant, by no means probably should have won that final game. But because of the story, because of the dramatic setup with losing 8 games, because of the fact that we were underdogs, having lost to the very first women's Olympic gold medal, and because men's hockey had not won in a long, long time, that team is really celebrated. And it makes a big difference when the men's team wins, because Hockey Canada puts a lot more money into the celebrations at the end and into marketing and just everything that goes along with the big machine. So I'm hoping that this team will be celebrated in that same way and will be remembered 20 years later as well.
Great. Let me ask you one last question, Sammy Jo, and that is, you have a very important direct connection to the Paralympics happening right now in Beijing. Want to tell our audience about that?
For sure. My husband, who is right here, is Billy Bridges, who I might be biased, but he is one of the best players ever to have played the sport of sledge hockey, now known as para hockey. And he's participating in his 6th Paralympic Games in Beijing. So unfortunately, our time in Beijing did not overlap. That would have been really great. But we do have a 6-year-old daughter, so somebody had to be here. But yes, he is vying for... He has a gold, silver, and bronze, 2 4th-place finishes. But in his 6th Paralympic Games, what I love about how his game has evolved is that he's become a better teammate along the way. And this last Olympics, I was really proud of the fact that despite the fact that they lost in overtime, they were ahead 1-0 with, I think the Americans scored with 38 seconds to play, and then the Americans won in overtime. Obviously devastating, but he was really able to celebrate his team's success and his teammates' success despite the disappointment. And I really feel like that part of his game has evolved, and he's able to now uplift his teammates and bring out the best in the players around him. So those are lifelong lessons that we all learn through sport that you hope come at some point. And so I'm excited to see him play. He's an incredibly gifted goal scorer for Canada. And it'll be some late nights these next couple of weeks as the Paralympics are going on, but I will be tuning into every moment.
Awesome. Sammy Jo Small, we're really grateful you could spare so much time for us tonight on the Hockey Time Machine. It's been great to meet and talk to you. Godspeed. Good wishes going forward.
Well, thank you so much, Stephen. Thanks for allowing me and us to talk about my team and women's hockey specifically. I think this is so important, and it's so important for people to know our history as well, and for all of us within the game to know our history as well. So thank you.
It's our pleasure. And in fact, we've got 2 more interviews to come, which we've previously taped with a couple of people I think you know fairly well. One's name is Becky. One's name is Cheryl. So we'll get to those now.
Amazing. Well, good luck with them. And we all remain close to this day. And they, in fact, live pretty close to my house as well. So enjoy.
Wonderful. Thanks, Emmy Jo. Be well. Bye-bye. Well, as indicated, we did talk to Becky Keller a couple of days ago. So let's play that interview for you now. Glenn, over to you. Joining us now from Burlington, Ontario, just west of Toronto, Becky Keller, who's played in 4 Olympic Games for Team Canada women's hockey, winning 3 gold medals, including in the Salt Lake City Games 20 years ago. Becky, it's great to meet you. How are you doing?
Thank you. It's great to meet you too. I'm doing well. Thank you.
I can't help but ask about the background there. That jersey that's behind you, what's that from?
That's the 2010 jersey from Vancouver, and then my alma mater, Brown University. So
right on.
Yeah.
Let me take you back 20 years, because you guys lost 8 straight games to the Americans before going into those Olympics. So the obvious first question is, did you really think you could win gold in Salt Lake?
Oddly enough, we did. And I always attribute that belief that we still had to the fact that we were able to do it, because we really did feel like we could win. I think a big part of it was the 8th loss was in Vancouver, and it was the first time all year we actually outplayed them and probably deserved to win. I think we outshot them 2-1 in that game. And so I think, coming off of that game, we felt like we should have won it, and we kind of built that belief in ourselves that we could do it.
They were, though, objectively bigger and faster. Were you at all intimidated by that?
No, I don't think so at all. I mean, I think we actually believed that we were as fast. I don't know if they were bigger. I guess maybe they were bigger, but I think they had been playing with more speed. We hadn't really shown what we had yet. And so, no, I don't think we were intimidated at all. I think, the contrary, being that, we just had this burning fire in us to prove what we could do and hadn't shown to anyone yet.
What was the locker room like immediately before going out onto the ice for that first period?
Any of those big games, there's a bit of a nervous energy for sure. But I really do think sometimes it's easier to be the underdogs, where you feel like you almost have nothing to lose. Nobody expects you to win. And again, we believed that we could. We believed that we could do it, but I think there was kind of a nervous energy in terms of like, let's just get out there and let's show the world what we've got.
You're playing, of course, in the United States, so it's a home game for them. When you got out there and hit the ice, what percentage of the building did you think was with them, and what percentage for you?
Oh boy, now it's 20 years ago now. I gotta remember. Honestly, it felt 50-50. Like it really felt 50-50. And maybe that's because I was focused more on the red and white than on the blue, red and white. But I mean, there were a lot of Canadian fans there, and so we felt the support. Funny enough, though, we'd lost so many games to me, and I would think my teammates would probably say the same thing, that I didn't actually think anyone was watching outside of the people that were actually in the building that day. So I remember just being astonished when I came home and having people come up to me saying, I watched that game and I was at the edge of my seat. And, the number of people that actually watched on TV. We'd lost so many games. We just felt like everyone had sort of written us off. So, I feel like we got on the ice that day. We were sort of playing for ourselves without this notion that, the country was still following us.
Oh, they sure were. And did you know as well that the men's hockey team was in the stands watching you?
Yeah, I do think we knew, and certainly we knew after the fact that they were there, which was a pretty cool feeling, right? To have those guys there and to be watching and supporting.
Well, it became pretty apparent early in the game that, let's put it this way: the officiating was truly subpar. And let's just take a look back 20 years ago and see, Glenn, if you would, the clip.
Working the puck, trying to go get possession. Wow. Wow, that's a real tough call.
It almost seemed like she had a U.S. jersey on, and it was just like, is this another thing we're going to have to overcome, and what else can possibly be thrown our way? And, it just didn't seem real that these penalties were really happening and that she was really calling them, and, she wasn't calling too many penalties against them, and
then we just started to think, okay, this is ridiculous. And, there's nothing we can do about it. There's nothing that we can control about what she's going to call. So we can't waste our energy complaining about it.
Becky, what did the officiating do to the team's morale?
I think every time we got a penalty, we were so focused that, and I remember listening to one of my teammates say she was so focused in that game that she, after the game, couldn't remember a single shift, right? Because you're just in the zone. And I remember every time there was a penalty called, the only thought that went through my mind was, well, we have a job to do now, right? We need to go out, we need to kill this penalty, and then we can get back at it. And I mean, penalty kill was sort of one of my specialties. So I don't think there was anything that we could think of outside of that. And so we'd go out and we'd kill the penalty. And I mean, like Cassie had said in that clip, you do start to think, this is maybe a little ridiculous, but I remember thinking, well, you always think that of the officiating when it doesn't go your way. So I remember kind of having that thought of, well, I don't know, maybe we deserve it. It really, for me, was after rewatching the game where I realized just how absolutely bad it was.
Well, did you think it was biased, or did you think it was just incompetent?
Honestly, I'm going to give her the benefit of the doubt and say I think it was just incompetent. I think she was in over her head. I don't think she was ready for a game on that stage at that level, and so she just didn't know how to call it.
Now, we've been looking at pictures of you throughout this, and we notice you wear number 4. Is there any reason for that?
Well, funny enough, when I went to my first Team Canada camp, they asked me what number I wanted, and I had been 17 when I was in college, and Stacey Wilson, who was the captain of the 98 team, wore 17. So I knew that wasn't available. So I sort of just left it a blank and figured they'll give me what they give me. And they happened to give me number 4, which is kind of funny because I grew up in Hagersville. My dad was from Norfolk, so I grew up in Haldimand, Norfolk being just down the road. And Red Kelly was from that area, and so was Rob Blake. So number 4 has a bit of a history in that area. So I don't know if it was just karma that I wound up with that number. Certainly some great defensemen have wore it before me. So,
well, of course, when any defenseman wears number 4, we always assume it's for Bobby. But I like those 2 answers you gave. Those are pretty fabulous guys too.
Yeah, they're great players. And again, I've had the opportunity, to meet them both. And was going to an event the one time and Rob Blake was going to be there. So to me, I'm like, ooh, wow, like Rob Blake, this is pretty special. And Red Kelly was also going to be there. And my dad was like a little kid. Ooh, Red Kelly. Right. So it was kind of funny, the different generations and people that wore that number and happened to all be from close to my hometown.
Now, let me take you back to the game. There's 1 second left in the second period, and Jayna Hefford scores this amazing goal. And put us in the dressing room in that second intermission. I'm just wondering, what was it like?
Sure. Yeah, it was a pretty incredible feeling. And we hadn't taken too many leads into the dressing room going into the third in those 8 games prior. So it's funny though, because, only 40 minutes had passed. Like the game wasn't over and we got into the room and we were excited. We're celebrating. And it was actually an Olympic rookie that year, Dana Antel, who was very quiet. She didn't say a whole lot, who was the one that actually brought us back down to reality. And you know what, girls, we have 20 minutes left to play. And we had come up with a code word that year that if the team got a little distracted, we had spent some time at this place called Emerald Lake on a team retreat. And that was sort of the code word of if anyone gets a little bit too excited, gets too, we'd have to rein everyone back in. That's going to be the code word. And sure enough, does Dana Antel stand up on the bench in the dressing room and yell Emerald bleeping Lake at the top of her lungs. And we all just kind of went, oh, we got 20 minutes left here. So, but yeah, that goal with a second left was pretty exciting for us.
Was everybody shocked when she did that?
A little bit, because she's pretty quiet, but she's one of those people that when she has something to say, it's worth listening to. And certainly it was in that moment too.
Now the Americans made it 3-2 in the third period. And I wonder if you allowed yourself just the littlest bit of doubt that the lead was slipping away. And here we go again.
You know what? I don't think so. I mean, I didn't feel that way at all, that it was slipping. I knew we had a period that we needed to fight and to battle, but I really do think we all believed that we could do it. And, and I've been on teams where you lose a lot. And so you chronically have that here we go again feeling. And certainly I've been on lots of teams that always find a way to win. And despite the fact that we had not found ways to win that year, I do think we believed that we could in that moment. Like, I just think we did not ever for a minute think that they were better than us.
Well, here's a moment you may remember rather well. Glenn, if you would, please.
Canada strikes the pose. Gold medal champions of women's hockey in 2002.
Was anybody concerned at that moment, Becky, that you were potentially going to kill the goalie by crushing her?
Well, I might have been, but I was on the bottom of the pile with her. So, and again, speaking of Dana Antel, it was actually Dana kind of on the top who was saying to me, "Are you all right down there?" And I said to her, "No, actually, I don't think I am." So they cleared the pile out and we all got up. I think we were just too excited to, maybe make a rational decision in that moment. But, that was the first Olympic gold for Canada. And we won a lot of world championships, but we lost in 98. And so that being the first one for all of us, and the season that we had gone through with all the losses, I remember when that buzzer went, just all I could say over and over is, we did it. We did it. We did it. It was sort of oh my God, like, we actually overcame everything that was thrown our way this year.
Those of us who have never experienced a moment like that often wonder, is it as good as what you think it's going to be? So did it live up to what you thought it was going to be?
Oh yeah, absolutely it did. I mean, and the thing you have to understand too with the Olympic team for the women is that we spend months and months and months training with each other. And so when you get to that moment, it literally is we did it together, and every person that's surrounding you knows exactly what you went through because they went through it too. And so, to be able to celebrate that moment with some of your best friends, teammates that, you love and respect. And, it's just, yeah, it really is short of, when my kids were first born, that would probably be the, next big moment of something that's pretty spectacular.
Now, there was one post-game interview that caught a lot of attention. And in case you don't remember which one it is, let us remind you. Glenn, the clip, if you would.
Haley, have you ever seen any penalties? In my life, I've never seen anything like it.
It was absolutely atrocious, but you know what? The Americans had our flag on their floor in the dressing room, and now I want to know if they want us to sign it.
Okay.
That was a pretty awesome moment. And I got to tell you, there is not an athlete on the planet, I think, that's more intense than Hayley Wickenheiser. And she brought that to the ice and to that interview too. It's funny, we'd heard about the flag and so our captains had told us about it prior to the game and used it as motivation. I don't know if that was actually a true story. The Americans say that it wasn't. And, I've got a very good friend that was on that Team USA. We went to Brown together, and she was one of my college teammates and roommates. So, I got to think they weren't, maybe they had our flag. I don't know if they were stepping on it. I find that a little bit hard to believe, but you know what? It worked for us in the moment for sure.
But your friend that you went to Brown with said it never happened?
I actually never asked her about it. It's one of those things, we're still friends. I don't really want to talk about that game, ruin the friendship. So, I never specifically asked her. I know their official stance was that they said it didn't happen. So, whatever, if it did, it did. If it didn't, it didn't. It worked. Like I said, it worked for us as motivation. I think it was something that was actually meant to stay in our dressing room, but you get pretty fired up in the heat of the moment sometimes.
Mm-hmm. We've talked on the Hockey Time Machine here to Team Canada 1972 members, the original Team Canada from 50 years ago, who say that such a bond was created by being on that team, even though it wasn't an 80-game season. It was just, a couple of weeks here, a couple of weeks in Russia, and some other places in Western Europe as well. But there's a bond for life that they just can't describe, and it's permanent. Do you feel the same way?
Yeah, I think so. Again, and for us, it was a longer period of time, right? It wasn't a couple weeks here or there. Mm-hmm. We started our training camp. Well, we had boot camp in May and June for 4 weeks, and then we moved to Calgary in August and trained together until the Olympics. So, I mean, there was that longer term training component for us too. But yeah, I think so, because again, I mean, I guess it's like anyone that puts himself in a position where most of the world's not doing what you're doing. So you have just a select group that really fully understand what your life is like day to day, and the emotions of it, and anxiety and the pressure and all of it, right? All of it. And so, yeah, I do think that there's that bond where we all share that and always will.
Were you the first member of your team to have children?
Yeah, to have them and then like physically have them and come back. Yes. I was the first one. Yeah.
I think we might have a picture of that. Glenn, if we got a picture of, wow.
Yes.
Okay. What comes to mind when you look at that?
I can't believe how big they've gotten. They're pretty little then, but that was just a great moment to be able to share with them. So that was from 2010. And my husband had to stay home and run a family business. So I moved to Calgary with the kids and my parents who, we all lived together. My parents helped to take care of the kids daily so that I could go do what I had to do. And so it really wasn't just me, obviously, sacrificing to get me to that moment. It was my parents, my husband, my kids. And so to find them in the stands, first of all, and whatever it was, 15, 16,000 people, and be able to bring them on the ice, it was pretty awesome. And my older son, he was 5, so he remembers it. And I think looks back on it fondly. My younger one was only 3, so he only kind of remembers it from the pictures, but, and they're big sports guys now too. So I think they appreciate that moment.
It's not unusual at all anymore for Stanley Cup champions or gold medal champions, men, to bring their, family members, their kids onto the ice and have pictures taken. But I guess you are the first ever female hockey player in Canadian history who's an Olympic gold medalist to bring your kids on the ice for that kind of picture. That's pretty cool.
Haley had her son Noah
right.
on the ice with her in 2002. So yeah, I definitely wasn't the first one, but and Noah was actually there. So at one point in time, the boys were all sitting on the boards and behind us, and it was Noah and my 2 guys. Yeah, so it was kind of cool. And actually, and I had Haley to talk about sometimes about balancing being a mom and hockey and that kind of thing. Cause it can be tough, right? Because, I wasn't living in a world where I had lots of people that were going through the same thing I was in terms of that. So Haley was a great resource to have just in terms of someone that knew what I was doing and going through.
Right. Now we've got a couple other pictures we want to show you before we say goodbye. And that is, Glenn, go ahead. Let's bring these up. These are very serious, important pictures from your, that's not bad. You want to tell us what's going on there?
Well, I believe that's 2006. And that would be one of my best teammate friends, Colleen Sestorik's defense partner in 2010, one of my defense partners. And you know what? I think it was just a moment of, we got some champagne and we won. So here, take this. And I think I got a little over exuberant though, because I actually think I chipped her tooth. I'm sure she'd give you an earful if she was here right now. So I don't know if you're talking to her later. That was 2010. So here's the funny thing. We got in a little bit of trouble in 2010. We went back onto the ice a little prematurely. But that whole tradition started in 2002, where I don't believe there's any pictures. So in 2002, after we won and we were so excited, we're in the room and we're celebrating. And that's when we learned about the Lucky Loonie at center ice. Mm-hmm. So we went back out onto the ice and we found the Loonie and we just went, this is unbelievable. The rink was completely abandoned. And so we just sat there and enjoyed the moment. And so it was so special. In 2006, we're like, we got to do this again. And then of course, in 2010, we went out a little early and there was no fans left in the stands, but there was some media. So the pictures kind of circulated, but you know what? We won an Olympic gold medal. So
yes, you did. Just finally, what are you up to these days?
Well, quite a bit. I've coached my kids over the last number of years. So I've helped with that, both hockey and baseball. I do lots of development in the area in terms of girls hockey stuff. Doing a little bit of work right now with Maple Leafs TV. So getting to do a little bit on the media side as well. So almost all to do with hockey, right? It's the stuff that I'm into. So, which is great because I love it. So it's a lot of fun.
Awesome. Becky Keller, we can't thank you enough for spending some time with us here on the Hockey Time Machine. It was great to meet you and talk to you.
Yes, thank you. Nice to meet you as well.
And we got one more for you. Glenn Dreyfus, my pal out in Seattle, Washington, had a chance to talk to Cheryl Pounder earlier this week. So Glenn, if you would, let's roll that one.
When they were handing out talent, Cheryl Pounder went through an extra time, I'm convinced. She's a multiple hockey champion, a motivational speaker, and an NHL broadcaster. So thank you for making time for us, Cheryl.
No problem at all. Love chatting hockey and life experiences and the journey. So anytime.
Tell me about the hat.
Oh, it's funny. So when I found out that I was going to be doing this and chatting with you, I went into the archives and I went and found my old 2002 hat. And I do say old because now it's been 20 years and I had to dust it off. I'm sure there's still remnants. You can probably still see some of the dust. But I think as athletes, sometimes in some ways we're hoarders, right? We hold on to those moments. And although the moment is ingrained in here, you know, all of the jerseys, all of the paraphernalia that I kept for years and years and years and not having the closet space to be able to hold on to it, but refusing to get rid of it. And these are one of the items. So I brought it out today as we reminisce about 2002 and that team, and brings a lot of flooding memories back to me for sure.
Before we get to the 2002 Olympics, which is going to be our main focus, but I have some other memories I want to test you on. Here's a photo. This is a roller hockey game. You're number 21, putting one into the net. Do you remember where this was and when this was?
Oh, geez. I think it might have been in Minneapolis. It might have been NARCH, the North American Roller Hockey Championships, where we did win, I might add. Our hockey team used to go and compete, but you'll notice that I probably couldn't stop very well, which is why my right foot is lifted there as I'm about to crash into the goalie post. But no, loved roller hockey. It was kind of a fun game for me to play in the summertime, and managed to go to a couple world championships as well with my club team that went over to both Germany and Portugal. So had a lot of fun, a lot of great memories. And that's one of them. I'll never forget that NARCH championship.
You won that in 92. And then a couple of years later, you were part of your first Canadian World Championship squad. Then you entered college and you were named team captain. So tell us, if you'll be immodest, about what it was that you thought others saw in you that made you captain material.
I don't know. I think I always had a strong work ethic when it came to the game. I don't think anyone ever questioned, when I was on the ice, that I gave 100% every time that I stepped on it. And so I'm sure that might have been one of the guiding threads. But I think that every team that we're with, and look at that hair, eh? Look at that mug. But when you talk about the players and the people that you're with throughout the course of your career, whether it's your family and then into the different teams, I think you learn something different from almost every player you play with. So I think there was a group of leaders on almost every team I played on, and so many of them could have been captain. But I think leadership comes in many different ways, and you don't have to have a letter. Of course, I was very proud to be able to wear that letter at university, where my fellow teammates gave that to me. And we would go on to win our first OUA championship and go to the national championship for the first time ever in my final year. So a lot of great memories that come from those years and those journeys, and a lot of great friendships that continue to last.
Well, you kind of moved to the end of the book. Spoiler alert. But before that, in 98, adversity, because you got cut from the national team. So what I want to know first was, what did you do to turn a no in 98 into a yes in 2002?
It's a great question. And I think sometimes we don't know how to deal with adversity. And like anyone else who's going through a tough time, I was down, I was out. I remember sitting in my bedroom and I was kind of looking up all these words that I'd written on my bedroom walls when I was young, courage and commitment and fun and passion, all these words. And I really was so afraid to get back up, because the fear of failure is sometimes stagnating, and I didn't really want to go through it again, but yet I wanted to be on the national team. And so there was this hardship, this hard time for me of learning how to get back up. And at the time, my family was very supportive, but it wasn't necessarily them that I wanted to talk to. And it was two teammates that sort of lifted me back up. And one of them sent me a quote that said, "Cheryl, courage is not defined by those who failed and fell, but by those who failed, fell, and rose again." And I kind of took my first step and got back up. And then came the tough part. I had to get feedback. And I know no one likes feedback, especially when it's not positive. And I had to find out why. And I think the only way we can truly grow as an individual in our sport, or it might be in anything we choose to do, is if we take ownership. And I had to really look at what I had done to not be on that team, but also what I could do better to get on that team. So I had to speak to my coaching staff and work on the areas of my game that they had told me I needed to work on. Whether I believed it or not, it was a reality that that's what they wanted. And so I started to work on those things. And then, of course, confidence comes into play. I think people can tell you to believe in yourself, but it's intrinsic. And then it comes from your teammates and how they value you. And I started to grow and started to build. And so by the time I got back on the team, I was really damn proud. When I got told that I was going to go to my first Olympic Winter Games, I was crying. I was emotional. I was all of those things. But a big feeling for me was pride, because to find a way to be resilient and come back through that adversity is something that will forever be ingrained in me. And I think in some ways now, as I reflect on it, I can say it certainly made me a better hockey player.
Well, take me through all the preparation. You've made the team, but you didn't just all kind of just show up in Salt Lake City. Tell me about all the preparation, both mentally and physically, that Team Canada went through before you ever got to the tournament.
Yeah, if you ask me, I can honestly tell you, I think that the winning happens in the process to the games. No one ever drops you in on February 20th or February 21st in February in a particular Olympics and drops you into the gold medal game and says, have a great one. It's all about that journey and preparation to getting there. And it's interesting, one of our great teammates, I remember something she had said, in 2002 was a very difficult year for us because we lost every single game we played to the Americans. And so there's a lot of emotion attached to when you're not winning, when you're competing for spots on the same team. Because what a lot of people don't realize in an Olympic year for the women's program, at least, is in Canada, is that you centralize. And what this means is that you relocate to train full time, a group of you, not the final team, and you train full time in the hope of completing that dream. So as of August 1st, you're living and training full time through the Olympics if you're successful. And you're competing every day for spots on that same team. So a day would simply look like, you wake up in the morning, you eat, and then of course you go to the rink for 2 hours. After you're at the rink, you're on the bike. In the afternoon after lunch, you're back in the weight room, or you're doing a bike workout. After that, you might be doing some mental conditioning with a sports psychologist at the time. And then perhaps in the evening, you're going back on the ice, because everything was designed for us to grow each and every day. And they had it down to a science, exactly what we needed to do to be ready for that final day. So some of the increments were designed to really push you down and make you really fatigued and tired and irritable. And then there was other moments where you got a little more rest, and there was travel in there as well. So all of this while you've relocated, you're not at home. I was engaged back in 2001, 2002. So my fiance stayed at home and I relocated out west. And so it's not an easy process. It's difficult. It's fun too. You're embracing where you are, the opportunity to represent your country. But there's a lot of angst that comes with that too, because you don't know if you're going to be successful. And so working with this to be able to perform is one of the key elements. So a lot of training, a ton of training, was the fittest in my life coming out of those years. But again, emotionally draining, and a lot of work that was put into the process. And interestingly enough, one of our great teammates, Vicky Sanahara, had said to us, don't wish time away, because often when you're finding it tough, you can wish time away, but learning to grow in every moment, good or bad, is what makes greatness at the end. So we tried to live by that, although it was difficult when we were losing all those games. So a lot of belief in the inner circle, if you will, to be able to bring it when it counted at the Olympic Winter Games, which goes down as one of the most memorable moments in my career for sure.
Finally, you get to the tournament. It sounds like you're a bunch of tigers finally being released from captivity. It was your first Olympics, as you said. Can you put that experience into words even before you get to the gold medal game?
I reflect on this a lot, because the dream from being a little girl to an adult walking into the opening ceremonies was actually getting to those opening ceremonies. Because I think anytime you watch as a child, or you know, in your amateur career, you watch Canada walk in and your eyes are wide and you think about the dream. And so for me, certainly walking into the opening ceremonies was something I'll never forget. It brought me back to sitting on the couch when I was 8 years old. And I turned to my grandma and said, I'm going to be there one day, Grandma. And the words where she turned to me and said, Cheryl, believe in yourself. You'll never know unless you try. They constantly resonated with me, in particular, right before we walked in. And then you walk into the opening ceremonies and then, you know, you're hit with this passion and this hope and this inspiration that goes well beyond sport. And I always thought it was about sport, but then you're in a village of a world all surrounded by one another, and it goes beyond sports. And then you go to the Olympic Village and you're with all of your other fellow athletes who have worked hard and trained hard to be in the moment. And all they want to do is the same as you, put in a personal best performance for your team, for yourself, your family, your country. And so added pressure, yes. But also just this unbelievable feeling of, you know, representing your country in honor. And then, of course, getting to those first games, getting the jitters out, finding ways to stay present in the moment and not let the pressure get to you all the way to the night before the final game, where you're calling your loved ones because you're a basket case trying to manage the emotion of walking into an arena on gold medal day and being able to believe in yourself and know you can bring it in that final moment. And there's nothing like that the night before, where you're tossing and you're turning and just the pit of your stomach and fighting with all of these thoughts. And then walking into the arena that next day and just going, yeah, I'm ready. We're ready. We can do this. And then stepping on the ice and being able to watch that and play to that becoming a reality was certainly something that, that I'll never forget. And having the opportunity to share it with my family as well, which is an experience of its own to have your loved ones there. So, yeah, I mean, I cried for about 2 weeks after we won. I told you earlier, just the overwhelming emotion that comes hand in hand with knowing that you've done it, but done it together. And until you're really there, I don't think you really feel that. And then you get it. You finally get it in that moment. And it's a bond I think we'll have forever amongst our teammates. And no matter where I am or what part of the world, I know that particular group of women will have my back.
Well, gee, I just wish I'd had the Kleenex concession in whatever town you happened to be living in at the time.
I am telling you, I remember skating over to the boards and screaming up at my parents, we did it. Like, I think I was yelling, Mommy, we did it. I wound up in 2002, 10 rows up in front of my parents in the stands, I might add, because yes, I went to the Zamboni doors and I climbed into the stands, and there was my brother wearing a Captain Canada cape, where, you know, painted body, you know, very normal, running down 10 rows of people, screaming at the top of his lungs, that's my sister, let me at her. And there I was, just hugging and embracing my brother, who, you know, used to hit me in the head during road hockey. And there he was. And it's an all-encompassing feeling.
Okay, but how did you do it? You mentioned that the Americans had their way with you in games leading up to the Olympics. The Americans had won gold in '98, probably because you weren't on the team.
Yeah, nice one.
But, so what was different in the gold medal game?
I think in a lot of ways, when you're the underdog, sometimes you can play a lot freer. You just, you know what, let's go for this. And what a story this is going to be. I remember Cassie Campbell standing up, Cassie Campbell-Pascal in the semifinal game saying, you know, if we get by this game because we were losing to Finland, we're going to do this. And what a story if we keep it in the room and we believe in one another. And so when we got to that final game, although the penalties were being called, it no longer was about the PK or the power play or how much time you got. It was about one team doing it for one another. I remember getting a tap on the shin pads by one of the stars on our team because she wasn't a penalty killer, right? She was a power play specialist, but we were on the PK the whole time. So she wasn't getting the same minutes she was used to. And I remember her looking at me going, go do it. So then we would go out there and kill a penalty, and then we would create some energy. And then the next wave would go. And we couldn't worry about what happened. And we weren't looking ahead. We just stayed so present. And we just continued with that energy. And we were up by 1 goal going into the third period. And our dressing room was on fire. And one of the women in the room just really brought us back to level and said, listen, we have one period left to play. Let's go out there and do this. And I don't know.
Code words. She used the code words, right?
It was. Emerald Lake just calmed us right down. And for those who don't know, the code word of Emerald Lake, we went away on retreat and we had a word. If anything got hairy, we'd say Emerald Lake would just bring us back to calm, bring us back to here. And in that dressing room, all of a sudden, Emerald Beep Lake. And we all just came back to sort of that zero. And we went out there and we did the remaining 20 minutes. And that celebration was one I'll never forget. It's a culmination of the work, right?
Yeah.
But in the moment, you don't necessarily think about the sacrifice. You just feel it. You just really feel it. And it's like our sports psychologist said to me, when I walked in 2002, right before I walked into the opening ceremonies after, I didn't getting cut 4 years earlier. And I had my video camera out, my camera, and I just wanted to capture the moment. And he looked at me and he said, why, Cheryl? And I said, what do you mean? I'm going to capture this moment. It's amazing. He said, no, he goes, don't capture it. Go live it. It'll never be the same, through that lens as it will if you just walk in and feel it and embrace it. And so I put my camera away and my video camera away and embrace that moment. And then of course, after I walked in, I pulled it out. But I think that was the same after we won. We really embraced and recognized what every woman had meant to that group and bringing it home to Canada. And one of the proudest moments I probably have is recognizing now that the young girls that would have been watching in those moments, and the number of young girls that would have said, I want to continue playing this game, or, hey mom, hey dad, I want to play. And so that's really now, as a woman who has young daughters and who coaches, I really value that as well in particular.
Now, your Olympic experience was far from done, because in 2009, ahead of the Winter Games in Vancouver, you got to carry the torch. How did you find out about that? How did that come about?
Well, the city of Mississauga had asked me to do the final lap of the torch run in our city, and then hand off to Hazel McCallion, our great mayor at the time, who would light the cauldron. And I was pregnant, and I remember the baby kicking, and I was absolutely ecstatic to have that opportunity and honor. But I never fully understood until I rounded that last final bend, and we were at Celebration Square, and there were all of these Canadians, and there was this cheer, and it really resonated with me about how the Olympic movement at times and just goes beyond sport, that it's just so inspiring, and how people were so positive and engaged and had brought their young ones out. My youngest daughter was 2 at the time, and the one in my belly was kicking, and my husband and my family, and then everyone was electric, and it was awesome. So I wasn't expecting to be overwhelmed by emotion in that moment. And I was. I really, really was. And it just brings you back to what that Olympic flame can represent.
When your kids were little, did you call them quarter pounders, or did you not do that because of the metric system?
Yeah, no, there was no quarter pounders right here, because they often say, Mama, are you a pounder and we're O'Toole or what? Because my great name is O'Toole. And I said, well, I was going to change my name on my jersey, kids, but O'Toole or Pounder, I thought, And for a stay-at-home defender who's supposed to be physical in the corners, Pounder sounds pretty strong. So, and also felt that my parents were obviously instrumental in getting me there. So wanted to make sure that their name was on the jersey for my final moment as an Olympian. But no, they often play like Pounders, but they're O'Toole. Yes.
So we should mention, oh, by the way, you won Olympic gold again in 2006. Which gold medal was harder to win?
Oh, that's a tough one, because I think both experiences, and I know it's kind of cliche to say this, but they're both so different. Certainly, I would say that the hardest year in terms of the losses in adversity would have been 2002. because of all the losses to the Americans. We hadn't seen that kind of failure before with our team. So to go consecutively that amount of time, there was a lot of question marks around whether the team was the right team, whether there should have been other changes. So for us, we had to really work hard to stay within each other, believe in what we were doing, and find a way to get it done, to be truthful. And so having that adversity, also playing the Americans in the final with all of those challenges, overcoming the officiating, it was probably the toughest game that we would have been a part of and the toughest lead up. But when you look forward to 06, we had learned so much from that 02 process. And there was a number of returning women from that group that learned a lot about themselves and leadership, about being great teammates, and learning what it took to be resilient. And so I honestly believe up until this particular year, that was the greatest team that we'd seen lace up for Team Canada. One of my old coaches was at the Olympic Winter Games. His brother was with curling, and he is the one that kind of threw the Canadian flag over the boards. And Becky Keller and myself wrapped ourselves up in that great flag and got what is one of the greatest memories and pictures for me of us both wrapped in it, just embracing after that gold medal win.
So your Olympic connection continues. You're a women's hockey broadcaster for CBC for the games in 2014 and 18, and then again just a few weeks ago when Canada again wins gold. My question for you is it tougher for you playing in the Olympics? Is that more nerve-wracking, or is it more nerve-wracking to watch it as an announcer?
Oh, that's a great question. Anytime I think you walk into a live event, in particular when it's hockey for me, the adrenaline gets flowing and rushing, and you're passionate. So there's all of those different elements that come into it. But very different in terms of being on the ice and in the booth. I think the preparation that it takes a lot of preparation to be ready to call those Olympic games. But more importantly, I think I've been removed from the game long enough in terms of when I played that I can sort of separate myself from it and just want to make sure that I give the best call to the game and do it just for both sides of every game that we call, to make sure that we're telling the right stories, the right messaging, and showcasing these women's great talents. So for me, it was an honor and a privilege to be in the booth this year. I hadn't called an Olympic Games in the booth live. I'd been on radio, I'd been on a panel, but I'd never been actually in the booth and the voice of it, which was just incredible for me, an honor to be able to do it. And the talent that was on the ice, I think, displayed itself tenfold. And there was a lot of talk around it and how good these teams were. So in particular, Canada and the US. So a lot of great fun. And it also just shows how far the game has come and hopefully where it's going to go.
This TV gig is worked out pretty well for you. There's one photo I have to ask you about. This was a milestone night.
Yes,
but
that was awesome.
Is this you taunting AJ Malesko, who also played it in the 02 final, but for the United States?
Of course it was. Of course it was. Now, I know AJ, and she is awesome at what she does, but I played against her, and so it was a friendly gesture. But it's funny, I got the call to do the game about 24 hours before, and I had to catch a flight late, unexpected. And I'd had my medals. I didn't bring them with me on purpose. I had them with me because I had done something earlier in the day when I found out I had to catch an evening flight. And I had them, and she had sent something out earlier in the morning on social media about the color of the medal in 2002. And I thought, man, this is perfect. I knew we were doing a hit with her and Shannon. So I was like, oh, I've got to pull it out. I just have to do it. And I did. And she was howling. It was funny, but yeah, there's some jabbing. There's always some sharp talk, right? Come on.
Scoreboard. You were doing scoreboard.
There's always bets on the game. Come on.
Well, listen, and some of you on the Canadian team end up marrying some of the U.S. players.
Happens, right? So you just, but when you step on the ice representing your country, there's always friendly talk. It was funny. And in Pyeongchang, I was on the panel, and she was in the booth doing the games for the U.S. And and she was doing a great job in her broadcast, and she would walk by me. And so she was wearing blue on that final day. And of course I was wearing red, just because we were kind of looking at one another and said, what's on the line here? Although you're going to talk and you're an analyst, it's your job to be impartial, but behind the scenes, the two of us, we could get going on it. So it was a lot of fun. And those are the little sort of nuances that make the game continually fun for us, behind the scenes.
Well, I don't want to overlook the fact I mentioned it was a milestone night, that broadcast. AJ was working on the Islanders broadcast, and you with the Ottawa Senators, where you're not now a game analyst.
Yeah, and it's incredible to see how far it's come, and to see AJ. She broke into a role, I believe it was after 2018, and she's done a fabulous job in that. And then I've been doing the panel work with TSN, and I got the call to go in the booth and do color. And so it was very special to be able to talk to her on the other side that night.
Final question. When my kids were little, now that we've talked about your kids, they were always in the backseat of the car saying, when are we going to be there? When are we going to be there? Now I find out Cheryl Pounder, motivational speaker, says it's always about the journey. Now, it's too late for me. I wish I had you in the car with me and my wife, Katie, so you could have explained that.
Maybe not after a car ride home after hockey. I got to curb that one with my kids.
Okay, but what does it's all about the journey mean when you tell it to people who you speak to?
Well, I think in life we're result driven, and that's fine. But we need to embrace where we are to get to tomorrow, and we coined the phrase back in I think it was 2006 that we're going to grow for gold. We're not going to go for gold. And so how do we grow every day so that we can achieve that? And so often we focus too far down the road in particular, and not where we are. And so embracing what we have, embracing the journey, and finding ways each and every day to be present and engaged, because it's not enough to participate in our lives, right? We have to find ways to engage. And so for me, when we can engage in the journey, sort of the end result often winds up happening, but we have to embrace it. Because if I just went to the Olympics for that 2-hour hockey game and didn't enjoy any of the process, or the camaraderie, or the teamwork, or the dressing room, or the feeling of success, or the passion, then I probably wouldn't do it. And yes, everything is going to have its ups and downs, and you're going to have your moments where you want to quit, and you're going to have all of that, because that's just life. But overall, do you enjoy the journey and where you're at? And can you be on top of your story? And so for me, that's a big element of it, is embracing where you are, good, bad, and ugly, and getting yourself to tomorrow. So again, it's kind of that never wish a day away, even though we do. But it's being mindful enough to bring us back to being present. And I'm constantly at a fight with myself on that as well, right? It's not an easy thing to do. But I think the journey is something that I think we need to embrace more. Because when I look back, man, do I miss, pinky swearing with Becky Keller before games, or being in the dressing room, just being silly, or it could have been a pub night with the ladies, or with my family, just sitting and watching a movie. And so where is it for you? And so, be mindful of the journey.
Well, I have certainly embraced the last half hour, getting to spend it with you. Thank you so much, Cheryl. It has been just a delight, and brought a smile to all our faces to relive your journey with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe I'm on the ice for 2 sessions tonight with my kids. Maybe I'll wear my hat.
That is fantastic. Cheryl Pounder, Glenn Dreyfus, great interview. Well done. Can I get everybody to come on now as we wrap this thing up tonight? Paul, Laura, Glenn, come on in. And Glenn, if you're able to as well, as you can tell, 2002, the double hockey gold was a very big deal in my household 20 years ago. So I went out and I bought this jersey back then. And Glenn, I bought the guys at Roots made up beautiful double gold jackets. And I think I spent $400 on one of those jackets 20 years ago, but this was just so memorable. Look at the patch, the part on the right-hand shot, that men's gold medal champions, women's gold medal champions. These were the patches on the arms. And then that's on the shot on the left is the back of the jacket. And I never get to wear that jacket anymore because my 18-year-old daughter saw it and she loves it, and she has taken it off to university and she wears it every day and she loves it. And so I think that's great. Somebody at least is wearing the jacket and showing off and remembering just how wonderful the end of the 50-year drought and the double gold men's and women's hockey in Salt Lake City 20 years ago. So that was wonderful. Glenn, take it away.
I'm going to defer to Laura because what we've learned on this show is listening to the women is equally important.
Oh, goodness. Okay, well, thank you so much, Steve, for interviewing and help organizing the show, as you always do. Paul and I appreciate Glenn jumping into the host seat for Cheryl's interview. You know, we all kind of work well together, and that's how the show kind of comes together. You know, sometimes last minute, sometimes way ahead of time. So it's great. And of course, Paul and Glenn getting all the photos and the videos together. You know, it's always something that makes this show a little more unique than something else. So I do want to say that it's our friend Lama Dan's heavenly birthday. So we wanted to say happy birthday, Dan. We're sorry you're not here, but we think about you all the time, and you're a big part of this show, even though if you're not physically here. So, and then Nuccio having a birthday on Saturday. So happy early birthday. If you enjoyed this show tonight, can you do me a favor and click the button down below, click the like button. And then if you want to find out when we go live, there's also another little button with a little bell on top for subscribing. And then you'll be notified every time 7 o'clock on a Thursday night we go live.
Fabulous. Thanks, Laura. Thanks, Glenn. Love to Paul, who's off in the wings somewhere. We'll see everybody again next time.